Chairman. Ms. Parisi, how many visa overstayers are there in the United States?
Sir, as I said earlier, I don't have that statistic with me.
Well, let's use the President's statistics that there are 11 million and 40% of them would be visa overstayers as opposed to border crossers. Do you take exception with what the President said, or can we just use that as kind of a baseline?
I, in all honesty, don't recall what the President said about it, but I'm not sure where those stats are coming from.
So you cannot tell me how many visa overstayers are in the United States.
I don't have that information with me.
Is there a list?
There is an interim draft entry-exit report which has overstayed data in it.
No. I want, are there a list of names of visa overstayers?
So anybody who's overstayed, regardless if it's a visa or a visa waiver program, those individuals have final removal orders, and our Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency receives that list.
So there's a list?
Yeah.
Is that list shared with federally licensed firearms dealers?
I am not sure.
Well, it is actually currently against the law for anyone who is here illegally or unlawfully to possess or purchase a firearm. And I understood in Mr. Good's opening he wants to create a new list of prohibited persons, which just struck me that maybe we ought to find out how good a job we're doing with the current statutes that we have. Do you know how many prosecutions that there were for, say, the last 3 years for folks who tried to purchase a firearm that were not here legally?
No, sir, but I can ask ICE that question.
Well, it wouldn't be ICE. It would be the Department of Justice.
Then I wouldn't have that information because I'm with DHS.
Well, and the good news for us is we do have that information, and it's an incredibly small number of prosecutions, like less than 100. So you can understand some of our skepticism when we hear folks calling for a new category of prohibited persons that cannot purchase or possess firearms when we've done such a dreadful job with the current categories. It is currently unlawful, illegal for people who are not legally in the country to purchase or possess firearms. And my question is, how many of those folks have we prosecuted? And the number is really small. Let me ask you another question about the terrorism list. What process is afforded a U.S. citizen, not someone who's overstayed a visa, not someone who crossed the border without permission, but an American citizen, what process is currently afforded an American citizen before they go on that list?
I'm sorry. There's not a process afforded the citizen prior to getting on the list. There is a process should someone feel they are unduly placed on the list.
Yes, there is. And when I say process, I'm actually using half of the term due process, which is a phrase we find in the Constitution, that you cannot deprive people of certain things without due process. So I understand Mr. Good's idea, which is wait until your right has been taken from you and then you can petition the government to get it back. I understand that that's his idea. My question is, can you name another constitutional right that we have that is chilled until you find out it's chilled and then you have to petition the government to get it back? Is that true with the First Amendment?
Sir, there are strict criteria before.
That's not my question, ma'am. That is not my question. My question is, what process is afforded a United States citizen before that person's constitutional right is infringed? Then he's fine with doing it with the Second Amendment. My question is, how about the First? How about we not let them set up a website or a Google account? How about we not let them join the church until they can petition government to get off the list? How about not get a lawyer? How about the Sixth Amendment? How about you can't get a lawyer until you petition the government to get off the list? Or my favorite, how about the Eighth Amendment? We're going to subject you to cruel and unusual punishment until you petition the government to get off the list. Is there another constitutional right that we treat the same way for American citizens that we do the Second Amendment? Can you think of one? Can you think of one?
I don't have an answer for you, sir.
All right, well, I'm out of time, but I've got a couple other questions, and I'm sure the chairman will indulge me. Do you know whether the female terrorist in California was subjected to an in-person interview before her K visa was issued?
As part of the visa process, yes, that individual was interviewed.
Do you know who interviewed the person?
I do not have that information. That would be a question to ask the State Department.
Do you know how long the interview took place, how long it lasted?
That would also be a question for the State Department. They conducted the interview.
Do you know what investigation, if any, was done into her in terms of education, employment, social media?
Those are all questions that should be referred to the State Department.
Who has her immigration file?
USCIS would have the immigration file.
I thought USCIS was a subset of DHS.
Yes.
And you're with DHS, so why wouldn't I ask you?
So the process would start with CIS for a K-1 visa.
I know, and then it goes to the State Department.
And then it goes to the State Department, which is where all the checks to see if that individual is eligible for the K1 visa. I'm sorry, I even lost my own train of thought.
No, I know exactly where you're going.
If someone is eligible, sorry, for the K1
Mr. Rodriguez
visa.
was with us yesterday.
Yes. Then the individual would travel to the United States. Of course, there's vetting done on the individual as they travel, as any individual is. And then within 90 days, they can apply for legal permanent residency, and then that is also when USCIS would get involved and do biographic and biometric checks.
I understand the process, and I'm out of time. I'm just going to make this point before I yield back to the chairman. There's an application process for, we're not even talking about the visa waiver program. We're talking about the process where there actually is a visa issued. There's an investigation, there's an interview, there's another interview, and yet we still got it wrong. And I would think the chairman, one of whom is sitting beside me, and Chairman DeSantis and Ranking Member Lynch, I would think that they would be very interested in her immigration file to find out what questions perhaps weren't asked that should have been, so we can learn lessons after the 14 are dead, and hopefully we can learn before there are 14 more dead. So I would encourage you to ask your boss to make that file available to both the ranking member of the full committee, the chairman of the full committee, the ranking member of the subcommittee, and the chairman of the subcommittee. And with that, I would yield back to the chairman.
How many visa waiver program overstays are there currently in the United States?
Sorry, I didn't bring that number with me.
Ms. Barisi, when I look at the witness list, you got the longest title. Deputy Assistant Secretary, Screening Coordination, Office of Policy, Department of Homeland Security. You got the longest title, and it says Screening Coordination. Now, what is that? What screening are you coordinating? Is that just intra-agency or is that inter-agency?
It's both.
It's both, so it's all that.
I could coordinate across DHS components.
And the two biggest issues right now that we're dealing with, we had these terrible tragedies, terrible terrorist attacks, and we're talking about the refugee issue and the visa waiver program issue, and you can't give us any numbers on either program?
So I came prepared to talk about the visa waiver program.
And I just asked you how many visa waiver program overstays are there, and you said you don't know.
Sir, I don't have a number. Visa waiver program.
So when I ask you how many visa overstays of the visa waiver program may have traveled to Syria before they got here, do you know that number?
Sir, if visa waiver program national has a citizen of a visa waiver program country rather has traveled to Syria, Iraq, or a conflict zone, and they're considered a foreign fighter, that VWP
not asking
country
that. I'm saying someone from Great Britain, comes to the United States on a visa waiver program, and they're now an overstay. Do we know if that person who's here today, maybe they're not even an overstay, do we know if that person has been to Syria before they came to the United States? Do we know that? I mean, I know this is what our bill that we just passed earlier this week is trying to get to. I'm asking, do we know that fact or that information now?
So that's why we have the IC involved, and there's an intelligence assessments, and we use.
I wasn't asking that. Do we know that? Do you know the number?
I don't know the number, but that's why I'm trying to.
But do we have people who are in that category I just described? Come from a visa waiver program country, may have traveled, they're here today, and may have been in Syria or Iraq or somewhere there in the last, before they came here. Do we know
If
that?
a citizen of a VWP country has traveled to one of those areas, there's a nexus to the United States, or the VWP partners shared that information with us, yes, we know that information, and we will vet against it. We will also use
But
our
could they
algorithms
be
in
here
the
right
background
now?
for
Could they be
travelers.
here right now is my question.
I don't have that answer, sir.
All right, well, how about, can you tell me anything about the no-fly list then? You can't tell me anything about those. How does a person get put on the criteria for that? Can you tell me anything about that?
Sure. The no-fly list is a subset of the overall terrorist screening database. The interagency works together. The terrorist screening database is owned and operated by the Terrorist Screening Center, as I said earlier. There are criteria to get on that are
How many American
agreed
citizens
to.
are on that list right now? Can you
I'm
give me
sorry,
that
sir?
number? How many American citizens are on the no-fly list right now?
I know there are American citizens on the list. It is an extremely small number, but I don't have my numbers with me. But again, that's something I can easily get back to you.
Ms. Parisi, I've asked you the number of Americans who've traveled to Syria, you don't know. The number of Americans who may have traveled and returned, you don't know. The number of Syrian refugees who've entered the country in the last year, you don't know. The number of visa waiver program overstays, you don't know. The number of visa waiver overstays who may have been to Syria before they came here, you don't know. And the number of American citizens on the no-fly list, and you don't know. And yet you are the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Screening Coordination, Office of Policy, Department of Homeland Security in front of the Oversight Committee, and you can't give us one single number to some, I think, pretty basic questions?
Some of those statistics aren't held by DHS, and so that's why I would like to work with my interagency.
That's
partners to
why
get you
I
correct
referenced your
information.
title. You're the one who's the screening coordinator for all this, and you said you were interagency. That's why I referenced your title. Seems to me you should, when you
I'm
come in
not,
front of this
I'm a
committee, you should have that
DHS
information.
employee. I'm a DHS career civil servant employee, and I will work with my interagency partners, but they're the authoritative source for a lot of those numbers that you
If
mentioned.
you could get us those numbers and the ones Mr. Russell asked for, that would be very helpful. I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
System.
Do most people come into this country on airplane, or do they come in by vehicle and car?
Believe it.
Or vehicle, cars, and walking?
I would anticipate it would be air, but I don't know.
Again, you're in charge of this stuff. And so, when will you get us that information?
I'm not in charge of the operations, but I am in charge of working on the
You're in charge
policies
of
with the
screening.
components.
Your title says screening in it. So, if they come in on a visa waiver program by air and depart not by air, what percentage of those people do you capture?
So that is what I would say is one of the gaps that we have acknowledged. If someone comes in by air and leaves by land, yes.
And there are literally hundreds of thousands of people who may have come here legally, but now they're here illegally, correct?
I don't have that number with me, but
Is it hundreds of thousands of people?
I don't have that
The answer
number
is
with
yes, correct? I mean, Mr. Lynch laid it out there for you.
I recognize that I'm under oath, and I just don't want to provide misinformation to you. It is not that I don't want to provide information.
So it's somewhere between hundreds of thousands and potentially the low millions of people that came here legally through the visa waiver program. What were the topic of this? The topic that we're discussing, and just decided they're not going to leave. And you should have a list of those people, right? Do you share any of that info? Who else gets that list? Who do you share that list with?
That list is shared with, I believe, it's shared with interagency partners, and it's shared across, yeah.
Who do you share that list with?
I don't have the list with me.
You're the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Screening Coordination, and in your job description of the one paragraph on the website, you're supposed to be the one that's coordinating with the other departments and agencies. When you have somebody who's a visa overstay, do you consider that a threat to the United States of America?
Sir, sometimes there are people who overstay that are grandmas that come over to take care of their grandchildren. I wouldn't call them a threat. I'm not saying that they shouldn't abide by the terms of their admission period. But calling them a threat is a totally different, circumstance.
So you just assume that everybody that comes here on this visa waiver program is not a threat?
I didn't say that either. Anybody who comes and overstays their period of admission here receives that final removal order, and we go after them and prioritize them based on national security and public safety first.
When do they get
resources that we have?
When do they get that removal order?
If you're here for VWP and it's 90 days, and on the 91st day, you're considered to be an overstay.
You said they give them a removal order. Who gives them the removal order?
The removal order would come from ICE.
And how many
I can check on the time frame, but
And will you also give us a list of how many of those have been sent out? When you have somebody who has then overstayed their visa, come here on the visa waiver program, which law enforcement entities do you share that with? Which databases does that go into? Can you name one?
So we will have within DHS the who has the final removal orders. I believe it's shared with state and local, but I don't want to say that with certainty right now. I will do my very best to get you the information that the department has on those questions.
Yeah, who is the specific person that would know? You report to, sorry, you told me earlier, the person you report to is?
Assistant Secretary Seth Stoddard. I'm in the Office of Policy.
And that person reports to?
Assistant Secretary Alan Burson.
And that person reports to?
The Secretary of Homeland Security.
Jay Johnson.
Yes, sir.
The request we sent was for Jay Johnson, and Jay Johnson sent you as the expert on these topics. So, this is why I think we need help on both sides of the aisle here, but Mr. Johnson, the Secretary himself, has got to come answer these questions. You strike me as a very nice person, but these are basic questions about the functionality here, and when we're having a congressional hearing, it is a waste of this committee's time to send somebody who doesn't know the answers to very basic questions. And that's why we will continue to pursue very vigorous oversight. We look forward to robust discussions. You're accelerating the need for us to have multiple hearings on this. Yield back.